and sacrificing for each other and struggling each other. And the love of Americans has shown, as it's evolved, the ability to leap space and time, to leap obstacles, to span differences. And we are a nation that was not founded because we all look alike, spoke the same language, or prayed alike. And in fact, we know we've had ugly divisions in our country, fearsome conflicts, but there has been a spirit that has still found a way to reach beyond that and to manifest a glorious, triumphant love. One of my favorite moments in American history is when a president who could have, at a time of division and separation in our country, when he spoke to the nation, his inaugural address, where he could have given into a dark vision of our country, and it would have been true. He could have accused the people who were opposing him of some of the worst of human character, but he chose not to. He said these profound words: with malice towards none and charity towards all. It was Lincoln's second inaugural address, but the moment that inspires me is that he went afterwards to a reception, and there was tons of people obviously trying to get at the president. And the historical accounts that I've read said he was being pulled this way and that. The governor of Rhode Island was trying to see him and all of this, but he kept pressing to find someone who he referred to as his friend, which in itself is amazing because these two men fought bitterly and angrily over substantive issues of life or death. And this friend that he was looking for was a black man who almost didn't even get in because of the powerful, anguished lines of race in America at that time. But he was recognized, and someone took this man and brought him in as a black man in a presidential reception after an inaugural address. And Lincoln is pushing to find his friend and being pulled different ways, but he's looking for this black man, finds him, and this black man, regal in stature but humble in spirit, literally says to the president, as it's recounted, please attend to your other guests. But Lincoln had a mission. He wanted to know something. He wanted to know from this man what we all do when we get up and give speeches or talks. Hey, how did I do? You know, he literally said, I want to know what my friend thinks of my speech. Now, this would be the last time these two men would ever speak to each other. This would be the last time these incredible historical figures would have a moment. And they looked at each other, and I'm sure there was a pregnant pause as this black man named Frederick Douglass looked at the President of the United States and simply said, Mr. President, it was a sacred effort, a sacred effort. I believe in many ways the hope of our nation actually does lie with many of our historical figures and how they acted in times like this. I'm not one of these folks that wants to whitewash our American history and eliminate the ugliness and the bigotry and the sexism and the hate that was prevalent in our history. But the power of our history is that despite that, we seem to have chosen a harder pathway of love despite the hate and divisiveness of our days. Look, our founding documents are saturated, unfortunately, are seen, replete through them as examples of those darker strains of human nature. Native Americans are referred to as savages. Women aren't referred to as at all. Blacks are, Stokely Carmichael used to say, constitute. I can only say 3/5 of the word. But if you look at the spirit of our founding documents, literally go to the Declaration of Independence. I always say, read the very end. What was the climactic appeal in the Declaration of Independence? It's a declaration of interdependence, this understanding that's seen in that wonderful African saying that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. It's this idea that we need each other, and we have to make an unusual and extraordinary commitment to one another. Even though we don't necessarily pray alike or look alike, we have to make an unusual and extraordinary commitment to one another for this country to make it. And our founders in this document, this profound writings by Jefferson, end with a declaration of interdependence. He says at the end, we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and that word again, our sacred honor. You know, I think that this is a problematic use of words when Americans appeal to this ideal that we should be a nation of tolerance. I think that's really problematic if that is the aspirational ideal of our society, because it is a rejection of that larger goal that we have, the more difficult goal, which is to be a nation of love. I tolerate a cold, okay? That's not what we were called to do, is to tolerate each other. We are called to love each other. Now, patriotism, which is love of country, I think mandates a love of one another. We don't have to like each other, we don't have to agree with each other, but tolerance says I'm just gonna stomach your right to be different, and if you disappear off the face of the earth, I'm no worse off or better off. But love says I see you. I recognize your dignity, I recognize your value, I recognize your worth, and I know that if we're gonna make it, we have to find a way to exalt that truth within one another and find ways to connect, to be together in a larger mission, a mission larger than ourselves. Tolerance builds fences between people, love rips them down. Tolerance crosses the street when someone else is coming, and love confronts and embraces. Tolerance says that I don't need you. Love says you are essential to my well-being. Tolerance says I don't have to care about what happens to your child. Love understands that if your kid gets health care and an education and thrives and becomes an artist or a doctor or an entrepreneur or an inventor, that I am so much better off, therefore I am invested in who you are and what's happening in your lives. Now that is this understanding that to me, now more than ever, is so critical, is knowing that we have an obligation to one another, knowing that we need to pledge a deeper, more sacred honor. And what bothers me is, while I am a big proponent and lover of technology and innovation, I am not a lover of the separations that are becoming easier and more convenient, where we can create our own virtual bubble around our lives, where we literally are no longer seeing one another and understanding our need for one another, and it's becoming even more convenient to have confirmation bias and to begin to believe I am so right and you are so wrong. There is a lacking of that humility, the heroic humility that I talked about in that first story. And not seeing each other creates a very dangerous reality. I mean, the brilliance of people like James Bevel and Dorothea Cotton, who in May of 1963 challenged Martin Luther King. These young innovators challenged Martin Luther King and said, look, what you're doing here in Birmingham is not working. We need to create, my words, not theirs, but a virality to the media that we have. Got to figure out a way to get the message out so people see us. And so instead, they convinced King to change his tactics. And actually, as Taylor Branch, I think the chapter title is called The Children's Miracle. They convinced Martin Luther King to let kids march against Bull Connor. And suddenly you have 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 13-year-olds and 18-year-olds marching against Bull Connor and his dogs and his fire hoses. And the media, before not paying attention, suddenly swarms into Birmingham, Alabama. Now people from Iowa to the Soviet Union are seeing on TV and running on front pages of newspaper the horrors going on by fellow Americans, and we who have reservoirs of love and strength and dignity and a heroic, courageous empathy reservoirs of courageous empathy that we don't tap into. Suddenly people were confronted with what was happening to their neighbors, and they were so offended by it that they swarmed in to Birmingham, and within days segregation fell.